Let's define a few things now on what we mean by integral solutions. Reminding ourselves again about what Pope Francis wrote in the papal encyclical Laudato Si. He said, "We are faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis which is both social and environmental. Strategies for a solution demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature." Again, we are not talking about the Pope because we are talking about religion, but about how social transformations themselves can be aided greatly by credible, salient, and what people consider as legitimate messages from entities like religious organizations, religious authorities, and religious organizations. Okay, so the Pope also talked about integral ecology, and integral ecology has two aspects of the interdependency: environmental impacts of human action. So that is, of course, not only the global warming, sea level rise, glacier melting, extreme events, and so on, but also the disparities of the impacts across the globe, right? Exacerbating poverty, health outcomes, vulnerabilities, risks, and so on. And then human impacts of climate change, which again interdependent on the environmental impact. So if the emissions from the rich countries made cyclones much stronger, or the rapid intensification of the cyclones is now becoming a norm. As I'm sitting here in November 2020 recording these, Philippines was hit, I think, by Goni, which was a incredibly powerful cyclone that rapidly intensified, and Somalia just got hit by Cyclone Gati, which also rapidly intensified. Now India is getting hit by Cyclone Nivar, which is tomorrow, and it's predicted to be rapidly intensified. The rapid intensification is directly related to global warming, atmospheric warming and humidity increase, as well as ocean warming and the energy for the cyclones. So these are the human impacts of climate change, and the global south, which includes all of the tropics except Australia, is impacted disproportionately by climate change, right? So that's the human impact of climate change. Those are the disparities that we have talked about before in the other chapter. So strategies for a solution, integrated solution, demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time protecting nature. So you cannot do a top-down imposition on, let's say, preventing deforestation of the Amazonia, take as an example. There wouldn't be much argument against reducing or preventing deforestation of Amazonia. But what does that mean in terms of the people who depend on their livelihood for some activities that may be related to deforestation? You have to move them to another employment. You have to provide a way out for them. Equitable solutions, not just impositions, right? So integrated solutions must take care of people who are disproportionately affected. Integral thinking requires more than getting experts and elites around the table to share their knowledge and strategies. That's not just going to help. Tackling climate change in an integral way also requires vertical collaboration between politicians, researchers, and grassroots organizations, religious leaders. So we just talked about what the Pope thinks. So the Vatican talking about climate change is a big deal, right? There's, let's say, more than 1 billion Catholics who look up to the Pope, and when he says climate change is a problem, that's going to have potentially a serious impact, at least in terms of awareness and the understanding that being Catholic doesn't mean that you assume environment is just something over which we have dominion. So that's where religious leaders can play a big role. Also for other religions, as we have talked about in the previous chapter. Educators and cultural producers who are closer to what's happening on the ground. So it's this vertical integration of knowledge and transformation of knowledge into equitable information access. Often it's called poverty is not just about money, but it's also about lack of information, right? Experts need to figure out how to mobilize and democratize scientific knowledge to inform public opinion on climate change. We have talked about this, we have introduced this in chapter 4, where we looked at the 3 levers and 10 solutions fitting into these 6 clusters. Societal transformation is what we are focused on here. So here are our aims, the carbon lever, SLCP lever, and BECS here is the bioenergy with carbon capture and storage or sequestration. So this is kind of gives you a sense of how integrated solutions must deal with these clusters, and the solutions have to live within them, and the levers have to be pulled to make them happen. So it's not just a theoretical concept that integrated solutions and integral ecology are needed. Whether it's an unintended consequence of climate change, for example, emissions from industrialized world making cyclones worse for the global south, but it's also about how solutions implemented, let's say, in the industrialized world worry about the impacts on the global south. Will they be positive impacts or will they be negative impacts? And that's not just about the environmental variables, it's also about socio-economic variables, education, employment, poverty, vulnerability, and so on. Okay, those are all the factors that we have to look at, and we'll see some examples along the way.